What if everything you believed about power, loyalty, and family was a lie? Not a mistake. Not a misunderstanding. A lie, built intentionally, brick by brick, over years. Covered in gold, crowned by success, praised by millions, until it broke. And not with a bang. But with silence. At exactly 10:37 p.m. on a Friday night, during a commercial break midway through WWE SmackDown, Roman Reigns, arguably the most dominant champion in modern wrestling history, collapsed backstage. There was no promo. No explosion. No storyline cue. Just a subtle flicker on a leaked hallway security camera. A figure stumbling, pressing a hand to his chest. Then, dropping. There were no paramedics on screen. No stretcher rushing past fans. Because this wasn't part of the show. There was no script for what happened next. Within 30 minutes, every camera in the arena had been cut from backstage. Commentators were told not to mention it. And a generic promo package about WWE's greatest family aired instead. Images of Roman standing tall with Paul Heyman beside him, crowned with pride, while thunder rumbled in the background. The crowd cheered. No one knew. Not yet. But what followed over the next 72 hours would tear apart the illusion. Because minutes after Roman Reigns was rushed to a local trauma center, a piece of audio leaked online. A voice. Calm. Calculated. Familiar. Paul Heyman. He has no idea what's coming. He thinks he's still the tribal chief. It wasn't a promo. It wasn't part of a storyline. It was a private message, recorded months earlier and somehow released on an encrypted Discord server tied to an anonymous wrestling insider. The audio had Heyman's voice. Unmistakably. And in it, he laid out a quiet, long-term betrayal that had allegedly been building for over 2 years. He built the bloodline? No. He performed it. He was the face. The suit. But we made the decisions. We, me, Solo, others, we chose what came next. He just stood in the light. It was the kind of audio that didn't just fracture trust, it shattered it. The internet exploded. WWE issued no official comment. Paul Heyman was not seen on SmackDown the following week. Solo Sikoa? Absent. The Usos? Silent. But the most haunting detail wasn't in the audio. It was in the moment captured right after Roman's collapse. A nurse later said that as he lost consciousness, Roman whispered one word, "Why?" To understand that single word, to understand the fall of Roman Reigns. Not just as a character, but as a man, a father, a leader, we have to rewind the clock. Back to when the lie was still being constructed. Back to when the bloodline was not just dominant, but untouchable. The story begins not in the ring, but in the shadows. In a locker room, years ago, where trust was weaponized, and legacy was currency. Where Roman Reigns wasn't just holding a title, he was carrying a dynasty. And that dynasty? It wasn't supported by pillars. It was built on secrets. You see, the version of Roman we saw on television, the stoic warrior, the ruthless tribal king, wasn't an act. But it wasn't the full truth either. Behind closed doors, Roman was known for being obsessive. Every storyline. Every match. Every word he spoke on the mic. He rehearsed. He questioned. He pushed for authenticity, not to entertain fans, but to protect the bloodline's image. His family's name. He wasn't just a performer. He was a guardian. But the more he controlled, the more others learned how to slip beneath his guard. Insiders now claim that Paul Heyman, while publicly praising Roman as the greatest champion in WWE history, was quietly meeting with company executives and pushing for Solo Sikoa's rise to prominence. Not as a supporting player, but as a replacement. There was always a plan, one anonymous staffer shared under protection. Heyman saw Roman aging out. Injuries. Fatigue. Creative burnout. He wanted a new face. Solo was younger, quieter, moldable. So the subtle sabotage began. Shifts in storyline logic. Moments where Solo's victories were emphasized more than Roman's. Interview packages where Heyman called Solo a future leader. And all of it, according to the leak, was done without Roman's knowledge. But why? Why would Paul Heyman, the man who had once stood beside Roman through pandemic tapings, personal losses, and historic matches, turn? The answer lies in an overlooked quote from Heyman himself, given during a Backstage documentary nearly a year ago. "I've always said, loyalty is only real when power is equal. The moment one man holds more, the rest must adapt." To Heyman, Roman Reigns had become more than powerful. He had become untouchable. And that, to a man obsessed with influence, was dangerous. So how do you bring down a king? Not with war. Not with confrontation. With erosion. Quiet sabotage. Make the king think the kingdom is still his, while moving the power behind him. And that's exactly what the audio confession described. Heyman spoke of secret strategy meetings with Solo Sikoa. Of cutting Roman out of backstage decision-making. Of letting him tire himself out while Solo waited, watched, and learned. The most chilling line? We don't have to destroy him. We just have to let him fall. And fall, he did. Not publicly. Not in a match. But in a dimly lit hallway after a main event. When the pressure, months of building betrayal, sleepless travel, fractured relationships, and internal battles, finally collapsed into his chest. A medical episode. Silent. Devastating. And for the first time in nearly a decade, Roman Reigns was off his feet. Not because an opponent pinned him. Because the empire he built crushed him. The fans didn't see it live. But backstage staff did. Some cried. Others froze. Because when someone that strong falls, the silence is deafening. But what made the moment irreversible wasn't just the betrayal. It was the cover-up. Because within hours of the incident, WWE issued a vague statement. Roman Reigns is dealing with a private medical matter. We ask for privacy. That was it. No follow-up. No update. No video packages. No tribute. Roman was erased from programming. Quietly. The same man who carried WWE through the Thunderdome era. Who unified titles. Who brought back edge, prestige, and emotion to the main event scene, was deleted like a glitch. Why? Because the lie was cracking, and they couldn't afford the truth to spread. But fans are smart. Clips surfaced. Whispers turned into reports. Reports turned into hashtags. And eventually, footage. Not just the collapse. But meetings. Old footage from months earlier. Roman confronting Solo backstage, accusing him of withholding information. Paul Heyman stepping between them, smiling. Telling Roman, "You don't need to worry. I've got everything under control." Now we know what that smile meant. And now the world is watching. Because this isn't just a story about a wrestling character. It's about trust, shattered. It's about empire, poisoned. And most painfully, it's about a man who gave everything to protect his family's legacy, only to discover that the people closest to him were chiseling away at the foundation. Roman Reigns is not the only one who collapsed that night. The Bloodline, the most dominant faction in WWE history, collapsed too. Not from an attack. But from a secret. A lie they thought would never surface. But it did. And now, the question isn't how Roman fell. The question is, can he ever stand back up? Because if he does, there will be consequences. And no one, not Heyman, not Solo, not the WWE itself, will be ready. It didn't start with a tweet. It didn't even start on Reddit. The leak that would dismantle the public perception of Roman Reigns Started with a 47-second voice note buried in a private Discord server used by former wrestling insiders and hardcore archivists. A community that normally shared rare promos, obscure dark match footage, and throwback commentary tapes. On most days, it was a quiet place. A shrine to nostalgia. But on that particular Saturday morning, less than 12 hours after Roman Reigns was rushed into a trauma center in Orlando, a user by the name Vault76 posted an audio file simply titled, "You Were Never the Tribal Chief." MP3. At first, no one paid attention. But then, someone clicked play. It was Paul Heyman's voice. Unmistakable. Calm. Almost surgical in tone. I never lied to him. I just never told him everything. That's the difference. Roman thinks he's the architect. He's not. He's the facade. The channel erupted. This wasn't a promo. This wasn't part of a gimmick. This was raw. Private. Something that sounded like it was recorded in a hotel room, or on a phone call he thought no one would hear. There was a TV murmuring in the background. Ice clinking in a glass. But Heyman's voice was crystal clear. And his message was explosive. You build a kingdom around one man, you risk everything on that man staying perfect. But men like Roman? They don't last. They burn out. They get tired. They stop listening. So what did I do? I planned the future. With Solo. The recording didn't just hint at betrayal. It confirmed it. And worse, it framed Roman Reigns not as a partner in power, but as a shield. A front. The man propped up to take the hits, while the real decisions were being made behind him. Within 20 minutes, the audio spread like wildfire. Clips on TikTok. Transcripts on wrestling news sites. YouTubers rushing to react, splicing it with old footage of Roman defending Heyman on camera. Fan channels that once celebrated the tribal chief now questioned everything. Was Solo Sikoa always meant to lead? Had Heyman been orchestrating Roman's downfall from the beginning? And then, the second file leaked. A longer one. Nearly 6 minutes. This one was different. No background noise. Just Heyman's voice, clear and deliberate, like a man reading out a confession with full knowledge of its consequences. We had meetings. Quiet ones. Before Roman even unified the titles. Before he broke Cena's record. It was already in motion. We let him carry the weight, while we laid the foundation underneath. Solo knew. Jimmy eventually came around. Jay? He was always too emotional. That's why he had to go. Those words hit like a punch to the chest. Because for months, fans had speculated why Jey Uso suddenly distanced himself from the Bloodline. His exit was abrupt. No feud. No storyline payoff. Just gone. Now, it made sense. He didn't walk away. He was pushed. Cut out from a plan that was years in the making, a plan to remove Roman Reigns from power. But the final minute of the recording changed the game entirely. Because Heyman said something no one expected. You think I did this to destroy him? No. I did it to save us. To save the Bloodline from becoming him. Arrogance. Ego. He started believing the myth. The head of the table wasn't a title. It was a warning. And he missed it. That clip alone garnered over 10 million views in a day. It was no longer just a betrayal. It was a philosophy. A justification. A cold rationalization of why Paul Heyman had, according to his own words, orchestrated Roman Reigns' eventual collapse. And when you pair that confession with what happened backstage at SmackDown just hours earlier, Roman's collapse, his medical emergency, his rushed evacuation from the arena, it painted a story darker than fiction. WWE refused to comment. But behind closed doors, chaos erupted. Executives scrambled to identify the source of the leak. PR teams issued NDAs to known associates. Creative meetings were cancelled. Superstars were told to avoid press. Social media managers deleted scheduled Bloodline posts. And the silence? The silence was louder than any statement they could have made. Roman Reigns' name vanished from WWE's official homepage. His merchandise, once front and center, was buried under newer releases. But it wasn't the vanishing act that unsettled fans. It was the timing. It was the precision. As if they'd been preparing for this moment. Insiders say a red-level alert was issued internally. Staff were warned against speaking to media. And in an even more chilling twist, Paul Heyman's contract profile was temporarily removed from WWE.com. He disappeared. Just like that. No press release. No farewell. No tweet. But Roman's condition? That's what made everything truly unbearable. Because as the internet burned with theories, memes, and think pieces, Roman lay unconscious. In a hospital room. Surrounded by silence. The man who once stood at the center of WWE's universe, now lay still. Vulnerable. And betrayed. Sources close to the family later revealed he had been suffering chest pain for weeks. Fatigue. Stress migraines. But he refused time off. He refused medical scans. He kept saying the same thing, the empire doesn't stop. But it did. It stopped when his body couldn't keep the weight anymore. And here's where the story turns even darker. Because while fans debated the leak, the collapse, the future, something else surfaced. Footage. Not from a camera crew. Not from WWE production. It came from a Backstage staff member's phone. Low angle. Shaky. But undeniable. It showed Roman, post-match, walking through gorilla position. Solo Sikoa trailing a few feet behind. Roman turned, expression heavy, eyes bloodshot. And said to Heyman, "You told me we were in this together." Heyman smiled. Cold. Almost pitiful. And replied, "We are. Just, not the version you think." That footage broke people. Because it wasn't theatrical. It wasn't promo-worthy. It was real. It was two men, one whose body was breaking under pressure, and another who had already begun walking away. And in the hours that followed, everything changed. The Bloodline wasn't trending for dominance anymore. It was trending for betrayal. Paul Heyman wasn't the wise counsel. He was the saboteur. Solo Sikoa wasn't the heir. He was the plant. And Roman Reigns? He wasn't the head of the table. He was the target. A man led into a war, and abandoned in the crossfire. And this is where the question no one wants to ask becomes impossible to ignore: was this always the plan? Because if it was, then what we watched for years wasn't a wrestling storyline. It was a carefully executed coup. And now? Now the only thing left is the fallout. The chaos wasn't televised. It never is. Because when empires fall, they don't crumble in front of crowds. They collapse in boardrooms. In silence. Behind closed doors, where power isn't shouted, it's whispered. Where smiles are rehearsed, loyalty is conditional, and everything, absolutely everything, is deniable. And the morning after the collapse of Roman Reigns, the morning after the leaked audio shook the foundation of WWE's most celebrated faction, the doors at WWE headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut, didn't swing open like usual. They locked. At exactly 7:42 a.m., a full 6 hours before office hours, a fleet of black SUVs pulled into the underground garage beneath Titan Towers. Out stepped executives, legal teams, and PR specialists. Some wore suits. Others wore panic. The building was already on high alert. Internal security was doubled. Cell phones were collected. Wi-Fi access was limited on executive floors. Elevators required passcodes. Monitors in the hallways went dark. And then, in Conference Room 7, the one normally reserved for WrestleMania planning, 12 chairs were filled. Every name, every voice, every face in that room had been carefully selected. Not for loyalty. For containment. Because this wasn't about Roman's health anymore. It was about what the world now knew. On the screen in the center of the room, the leaked audio played again. Paul Heyman's voice echoed off the glass walls. He doesn't even know what we're building behind his back. No one spoke. Then came the video, grainy, unfiltered, undeniable, of Roman stumbling backstage, clutching his chest. A producer's voice off-screen, "Is he okay?" A trainer running in. Roman gasping, then going still. And finally, the footage of Heyman's icy smile. "We are. Just, not the version you think." A silence followed. Heavy. The kind that tastes like regret. Then, from the head of the table, one of WWE's longest-serving executives, came a question that cracked the room open: "How long have we known?" The room didn't answer. Because the real answer was damning. Months. Possibly years. Heyman's influence had been growing unchecked. Scripts rewritten at the last minute. Matches reshuffled. Promo segments heavily edited. And at the center of it all, Roman Reigns, giving everything he had, unaware that his story had been hijacked. In that moment, the facade didn't just fracture, it shattered. This wasn't a one-man betrayal. It was a failure of an institution. And someone would have to answer for it. But not publicly. Not yet. Instead, damage control began. WWE's legal team proposed a non-disclosure strategy, documents prepared for every staff member, producer, and wrestler who had even remotely interacted with Roman or Heyman in the last 12 months. A wave of silence was to be enforced. Violations would lead to lifetime bans, lawsuits, erased legacies. A separate team was assigned to monitor online chatter. Dozens of independent creators, journalists, and ex-wrestlers had already begun dissecting the leaks on YouTube, X, Instagram. New policies were drafted to combat what WWE was now calling reputational sabotage. But the reality? The sabotage wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within. And while executives debated policies and PR plays, something else happened, quietly, but no less destructive. 3 high-ranking officials resigned. One was a veteran creative writer. One was from talent relations. The third was from legal. All 3 left without a press statement. No tweet. No thank you. Just gone. Because even behind locked doors, some things were too toxic to salvage. And the more they tried to contain it, the more it leaked. Backstage at SmackDown, staff reported crying exits. Not fans. Not even talent. Producers. People who'd worked with Roman for over a decade. People who had watched him rise, fall, rise again. They weren't just watching a story end. They were watching a man be erased. He was a protector, one production manager later whispered. And we let them strip him. Even the locker room atmosphere began to shift. Whispers replaced laughter. Glances were paranoid. Names were avoided. One anonymous talent reportedly said, "It's like grieving someone who's still breathing." The damage wasn't just personal. It was cultural. The bloodline wasn't just a storyline. It was a philosophy. A way to explain power, family, hierarchy, honor. It gave meaning to matches. It gave soul to shows. And now? It was toxic. Contaminated by manipulation, lies, and a betrayal that felt less like a twist, and more like a confession. And then, something even darker emerged. Locked-door meetings weren't just happening in Stamford. They were happening in Orlando. At the WWE Performance Center, NXT management held a quiet emergency briefing. The reason? Footage had surfaced of Solo Sikoa training. Months ago, with new talent while explicitly referring to himself as the next tribal chief. Not in character. In conversation. A source leaked a snippet, Roman's gonna burn himself out. He doesn't see it. But I do. That's why I'm learning everything he doesn't teach. That clip never went public. WWE paid to bury it. But in a private Slack message chain later revealed by a hacker group, one phrase stood out, allegedly written by a producer who had been in that training session. They've been building Solo as the future. Roman's just the bridge. Suddenly, everything was clearer. Roman wasn't just betrayed. He was replaced. And the worst part? The plan was institutional. But here's the twist no one expected: Roman Reigns never signed a long-term exit clause. According to records, Roman's contract gave him partial creative control. It gave him approval rights on merchandise. But nowhere did it give him the power to stop a narrative shift he didn't see coming. Because the betrayal wasn't just personal. It was structural. He was given power, just enough to feel safe, but not enough to stop what had already been written in ink. And now, every hallway at WWE HQ echoed with a single phrase: what do we say when he wakes up? Because Roman wasn't dead. He wasn't done. He was recovering. And if he came back, not to perform, but to speak, he could burn it all down. So plans were drawn. Old protocols. Legacy damage assessments. PR contingencies. If Roman returns and speaks publicly, offer full medical retirement honors and Hall of Fame headlining status. Translation? By his silence. But those behind locked doors knew one thing: Roman Reigns doesn't stay silent. Not when it's about family. Not when it's about legacy. And certainly not when it's about betrayal. So they waited. And the world did too. Because silence might protect an empire. But eventually, the doors open. And when they do, truth walks out. And truth never forgets. You never saw the war start. That's the thing about betrayal: it doesn't explode. It leaks. And for the Bloodline, what began as a story of unity and tribal dominance had, behind the curtain, turned into something darker. Quiet side glances. Unspoken tension. Hesitations in promos. Refusals to tag in. Every subtle beat that fans ignored was a warning. Because the truth is, this civil war didn't begin the night Roman collapsed. It began the night he handed Solo Sikoa a chair. Rewind to the fall of 2022. Roman Reigns was at the height of his dominance. 2 belts, 2 brands, and 2 cousins doing his bidding. The storyline was untouchable. The character, mythical. But there was a shift happening behind the scenes. Jey Uso, the emotional heartbeat of the Bloodline, had grown distant. He was still performing, still showing up, but something in his eyes was different. More hesitant. Less loyal. And the camera never caught it fully. But insiders did. There were nights Jey would arrive late to production meetings. He'd skip press interviews. He'd avoid eye contact when Heyman spoke. Then came the first untelevised confrontation. One source, a security staffer, recounted it like this: Roman told Jey, "You talk to me before you talk to anyone else." Jey didn't respond. He just looked away. Roman slammed his water bottle and walked out. No punches. No yelling. Just silence. But it was the kind of silence that says everything. That same night, Solo Sikoa stood backstage with Heyman, watching a monitor. The camera caught them briefly, off focus, during a live segment. But if you zoom in, if you slow the footage down, you'll see Heyman lean over and whisper something into Solo's ear. We now know what he said. He's not built for the long game. You are. It was the beginning of a shift. Not just in creative direction. In power. The dynamic started changing immediately. Solo began receiving more dominant finishes. fewer losses, longer matches. Meanwhile, Jay was booked into emotional limbo, winning one week, losing another. Directionless. A pawn without a king. Roman watched it all happen. But he never questioned it. Or maybe, he didn't see it. Because trust is blinding. Especially when it's weaponized. But Jay did see it. And he wasn't silent. Sources now confirm Jay privately confronted Heyman backstage, accusing him of manipulating Roman, pushing Solo forward, and erasing the work they'd all built together. Heyman allegedly replied with one line, "I protect the legacy. Not the man." 3 weeks later, Jey Uso quietly requested time off. The official reason? Burnout. But insiders now admit, it was disillusionment. He had been removed from key Bloodline meetings. Excluded from creative pitches involving the faction. And Solo had been given Jay's original match slot at a major premium live event. The civil war had begun. And Roman was too proud to see it. But Jimmy Uso did. Always more silent than his brother, Jimmy started moving differently. In interviews, he dodged Bloodline questions. On social media, he began posting cryptic messages. Old photos. One in particular stood out. An image from their childhood. Roman, Jay, Jimmy, and Heyman. Caption, "Everything ends." At the time, fans thought it was poetic. Now? It reads like a prophecy. Because just weeks later, Jimmy confronted Solo backstage. No cameras. No microphones. Just words. "You think you're ready? You think Paul ain't using you too? You think Roman's the only one who got played?" Solo didn't reply. He just stared. That confrontation, according to one talent agent, was the moment we all knew this wasn't a story anymore. This was real. Meanwhile, Roman carried on. Still calling himself the tribal chief. Still holding court on both brands. Still trusting the men standing behind him, even as they moved further away. And Paul Heyman? He was the bridge. Still managing Roman on screen, still whispering in Solo's ear off it. But what fans didn't see was the series of meetings that began taking place in secret. Heyman and Solo. Heyman and Creative. Heyman and Triple H. Meetings that Roman wasn't invited to. When asked why, producers gave canned answers. Just restructuring. Just early planning. But the truth? They were mapping out a transition. Away from Roman. Toward Solo. And that's when the decisions turned tactical. Roman started losing creative leverage. Segments he approved were rewritten. Lines he delivered were cut from final broadcasts. Promotional materials began quietly emphasizing Solo's undefeated streak, his Samoan heritage, his rising discipline. The phrase "next phase of the Bloodline" appeared on multiple internal pitch decks. But what shattered everything, what turned this hidden conflict into open fracture, was a moment no one noticed at the time. A 6-man tag match on a house show in Des Moines. Roman tagged in. Looked to Jimmy. Jimmy reached out. Solo dropped off the apron. Not in protest. Not an injury. Just stepped down. Roman stared. The crowd didn't understand. But Jimmy? Jimmy looked broken. After the match, no handshakes. No celebration. Just Roman standing alone in the ring, panting. Confused. And Solo walking up the ramp without looking back. The next morning, Roman called a meeting. It lasted 3 hours. No notes. No producers. No cameras. Just 4 men, Roman, Solo, Jimmy, and Heyman. We don't know everything that was said. But one mic picked up a single phrase, reportedly muttered by Jimmy as he walked out of the room, "This ain't family anymore." From that moment forward, the Bloodline was fractured. And WWE scrambled. The storyline was too lucrative to lose. the merchandise too profitable, the image too iconic. So they made a choice: fake unity. They kept producing segments with Roman and Solo standing side by side. They edited crowd reactions. They coached interviews. But if you watched closely, the cracks showed. Roman started showing up less. Heyman started standing closer to Solo. And Jimmy? He all but vanished. A few appearances. A few promos. But nothing consistent. No arcs. No finish. Because his arc was erased. He wasn't part of the plan anymore. Neither was Jay. The bloodline, once built on familial bonds, was now a structure of power, fear, and quiet manipulation. And at the center of it all? Paul Heyman. The man who convinced Roman to become something darker, and then replaced him when the darkness became inconvenient. This hidden civil war didn't need weapons. It had silence. Secrets. And time. And eventually, time ran out. Roman collapsed. Heyman disappeared. The audio leaked. And now the world sees what insiders knew for over a year: the bloodline didn't break because of an attack. It broke because of a betrayal that began the moment Roman handed Solo a chair, and never looked back. The collapse was sudden. But the breakdown? That started long before. Roman Reigns didn't fall because of a single moment. He fell because his body had been screaming long before the world ever saw him stumble. The physical signs were there. But in the world Roman lived in, where strength was the currency and vulnerability the enemy, he refused to acknowledge them. Because when you're the face of a billion-dollar empire, silence isn't just discipline. It's survival. For months, Roman had been feeling it. Shortness of breath during rehearsals. A sharp pressure in his chest when he bent forward to lace his boots. Night sweats. Ringing in his ears. A heart rate that spiked in stillness. He told himself it was nothing. Fatigue. Jet lag. The cost of carrying the industry on his back for 3 years straight. He told doctors to keep it quiet. No official tests. No scans. No downtime. Just basic physicals and hydration protocols. The team warned him. His wife warned him. Even his own children, in their innocent way, began to ask why Daddy was always so tired. But Roman Reigns couldn't rest. Not now. Not when he had spent the last decade becoming more than just a wrestler. He was a symbol. A leader. A lineage. And most importantly, he had to prove something, to everyone who doubted him, to the company that nearly gave up on him years ago during his initial babyface run, and to himself. So he kept going. Match after match. Tour after tour. Meeting after meeting. And every time he took a bump, he got up. Every time his ribs ached, he smiled through the pain. Because that's what leaders do. Until they can't. On that Friday night, after a segment that should have been routine. A short confrontation with Solo Sikoa, a smirk, a spear delivered with mechanical precision, Roman walked through Gorilla with that same confidence. But the moment the curtain dropped behind him, his body betrayed him. His chest seized. Not just tightness, pressure, like a fist closing around his heart. His vision blurred. He reached out for a wall that wasn't there. And then, down. Not a dramatic thud. No shouting. Just a slow, heavy slide to the floor. The first person to reach him wasn't a medic. It was a sound technician. The crew thought it was a work at first. A promo bit. Roman playing mind games again. But the sound guy saw the look in his eyes. Distant. Hollow. Not performance. Real pain. Trainers rushed in seconds later. Someone called for EMTs. The hallway was cleared. Monitors went to black. But the most haunting detail? According to one medical staffer, Roman didn't speak. He whispered. One word. Why? And then he went unconscious. The ambulance ride was quiet. Tense. WWE security rode in the front. Medics in the back kept their heads down. Roman's vitals fluctuated. They stabilized him. Barely. But the damage had already been done. At Orlando Regional Medical Center, Roman Reigns was admitted under a pseudonym. Diagnosis: acute myocardial stress, brought on by a dangerous combination of prolonged physical exhaustion, elevated cortisol levels, and undiagnosed cardiac inflammation. Translation? His heart was breaking. Not emotionally. Literally. The doctors said the same thing to everyone who came to visit him in those early hours: he should have collapsed months ago. And yet, he kept going. Why? Because Roman Reigns wasn't playing a character. He was bearing a cross. Every promo he delivered, every title defense he won, every silence he held in front of millions of fans, it was real. He wasn't just defending a belt. He was defending a name. A legacy. A tribe. And now? Now he was a patient. A man in a hospital gown. 4 lines in his arm. EKG nodes on his chest. His head tilted to the side. His breathing shallow. The man who once called himself the head of the table couldn't even lift his own hand. And that's when the memories began. Hospital staff report that Roman experienced periods of waking confusion. Not just physical disorientation, but emotional unraveling. He would wake up and mumble names. Jimmy. Jay. Paul. He asked where he was. He asked what city it was. He asked if it was WrestleMania weekend. One nurse, visibly shaken, later told a friend he didn't ask about the fans. He didn't ask about the title. He asked if his family knew. Because at his core, Roman Reigns wasn't afraid of death. He was afraid of dying alone. He was afraid that everything he gave himself to, the stories, the symbolism, the sacrifice, had been for nothing. And worse? That it had been used against him. He replayed moments in his mind. Paul Heyman's promises. Solo's quiet obedience. Jimmy's avoidance. The audience chanting tribal chief while, behind the curtain, the men closest to him were planning something else. And when the audio leaked, when Roman, still foggy with medication, was finally allowed to hear it, he didn't cry. He didn't scream. He didn't speak. A single tear rolled down the side of his face. He turned away from the nurse. And he slept for 13 hours. The next morning, he requested silence. No visitors. No messages. Just silence. And in that silence, something broke. Not just in Roman's body, but in his soul. Because betrayal isn't just what someone does to you. It's what they take from you. Your sense of control. Your pride. Your memory of the people you trusted. And Roman? He didn't just lose control. He lost belief. He watched years of loyalty, manipulation, and sacrifice collapse into a single question that echoed louder than any entrance theme he ever walked out to: was any of it real? No doctor could answer that. No executive would dare try. And so, in that hospital room, hidden from the cameras, the chants, the gold-plated belts, Roman Reigns lay in silence. A leader with no kingdom. A warrior with no war. A man, broken. The empire didn't fall in one night. It fractured. Then it panicked. Then it fought. And when WWE realized what had happened, not just Roman's collapse, but the leaked audio, the exposure of internal sabotage, the emotional implosion of its golden storyline. The first reaction wasn't grief or accountability. It was control. The morning after Roman Reigns was hospitalized, the company entered what insiders called Code Black. It wasn't public. It never is. But behind the polished branding, the championship glitz, and the nostalgia-laced social media posts, a war room was formed. Not for creative recovery. Not for truth. But for survival. The calls began at 4:17 a.m. The company's chief PR strategist dialed WWE's most powerful executives, agents, and legal counsel. A digital media sweep was immediately ordered. Anything tagged Roman Reigns, Heyman leak, Bloodline betrayal was flagged for review. Licensing partners were instructed to pause new ad spots featuring Roman. Influencer campaigns were suspended. Third-party talent deals were frozen. Roman's name wasn't just radioactive. It was a threat to the illusion. Because WWE wasn't just selling stories. It was selling invincibility. And Roman Reigns was its proof. He had survived everything: fan rejection, leukemia, boos in every city, character failures. He'd turned it all into gold. Into dominance. Into something WWE could point to and say, this is what happens when you trust the system. But now? Now, that same system had cracked him. So the scramble to fight for the empire began. And it wasn't creative that led the charge. It was legal. By 9:00 a.m., WWE's senior legal team had prepared a 23-page internal advisory, summarizing the leak, the potential legal exposure, and a tiered damage control strategy. At the top of the list? Contained Paul Heyman. Because regardless of how popular he was, regardless of how essential his mind had been to wrestling history, Paul Heyman was now a liability. The leaked audio left little room for interpretation. He didn't just mislead Roman. He admitted to years of internal manipulation, deception, and power redirection, some of which, if proven systemic, could be considered breach of contract, fraudulent behavior, or even tortious interference. WWE's legal counsel debated their options in private: terminate quietly and retroactively frame it as creative direction change. Negotiate a legal gag order and offer Hall of Fame induction in exchange for silence. Publicly blame the leak on an unauthorized third party to preserve Heyman's persona. But as they debated, something else surfaced. Emails. Anonymous emails. Hundreds of them. Sent to wrestling journalists, podcasters, even sponsors. All with the same subject line: you think you know the Bloodline? Each email contained snippets, screenshots of text messages, notes from creative meetings, internal memos with Paul Heyman's signature, voice memos of Solo Sikoa and Heyman discussing the transition. It was undeniable. This wasn't just a one-man betrayal. It was institutional. And WWE was complicit. So what did they do? They sanitized. Roman Reigns was quietly removed from future event posters. Heyman's biography page was wiped clean. Social media teams flooded platforms with other content, highlight reels of Rhea Ripley, Cody Rhodes, Becky Lynch, Gunther. Anything to shift the narrative. Anything to make people forget that their biggest storyline was now a smoldering crater. But fans weren't buying it. Hashtag Justice for Roman began trending within hours. Memes stopped being funny. They turned angry. Turned raw. Fans uploaded old footage of Roman backstage helping new talent, consoling children in Make-A-Wish segments, putting over lesser-known wrestlers. They asked, "This is the guy you tried to erase?" Meanwhile, internal conflict deepened. Several wrestlers, especially those close to Roman, refused to participate in matches involving Heyman or Solo. One backstage producer leaked a quote from an anonymous top-tier star: "If Paul walks back in here, I walk out." Others, feeling guilt, began to speak off record. A former creative team member confessed that storylines involving Solo had been prioritized over Roman's own requests for months. "Paul told us Roman would be stepping down soon. That it was time to shift power. We didn't know Roman didn't agree. We didn't know he was still fighting." Executives scrambled again. This time, their tactic changed. No longer just cleanup. Now, they needed a savior. Enter Cody Rhodes. At a hastily scheduled emergency creative summit, Cody's name was brought up repeatedly. The thinking was simple: position Cody as the new emotional anchor. Push him forward while the bloodline unraveling played out behind the curtain. Make the fans rally behind something, anything, hopeful. But it didn't work. Because Cody refused. Sources claim that when pitched a modified family versus family storyline involving Solo Sikoa, Cody responded, "I'm not replacing Roman. Not like this." That quote reportedly earned a standing silence in the room. Not applause. Silence. Because it wasn't just about wrestling anymore. It was about honor, respect, legacy, and the realization that WWE hadn't just lost a character. They'd betrayed a human being. Meanwhile, Paul Heyman? Nowhere to be found. His phone went straight to voicemail. His agent declined all interviews. No sightings. No responses. No press statements. The man who once narrated the rise of an empire had vanished in its ashes. But not everyone was hiding. Jey Uso, silent since his departure, posted a photo. An old picture. Roman. Jimmy. Jay. Heyman. Captioned only with 4 words, "He was our brother." The post went viral. And with it, the fight for the empire began to split. Because now, the battle wasn't just inside Stamford boardrooms. It was inside the hearts of everyone who had once stood in the bloodline's shadow. Do they stay silent to protect the empire? Or speak up and burn it? The fight wasn't about storylines anymore. It was about survival. Of the truth. Of Roman's legacy. Of the empire, if it even deserved saving. And as all of this unfolded, meetings, emails, resignations, standoffs, a nurse wheeled Roman Reigns out to a hospital garden. He read it once. Twice. Then looked up. No words. Just a look. Not of confusion. Not of sadness. Of calculation. Because if Roman Reigns was awake, the real fight was just beginning. Sometimes, the loudest moments are completely silent. A hallway. A bedside. A breath. In the days following Roman Reigns' collapse, and the corporate scramble to contain it, something deeper began to take shape. Not in headlines. Not in boardrooms. But in symbols. Private moments. Things not meant for the cameras, yet louder than any promo or press release. Because when an empire breaks, the first thing people do is try to remember what held it together in the first place. And what they found was grief. Real grief. The kind that doesn't scream. It lingers. It hangs in the air like fog. Inside the hospital, Roman Reigns remained under observation. Monitored around the clock. His vitals had stabilized, but his spirit hadn't. There was no recovery plan for what had been broken. Because this wasn't just about health. It was about betrayal. Identity. Isolation. Doctors came in. Nurses adjusted 4 lines. Family came and went. But Roman barely spoke. Except for one moment. When his daughter walked in. She didn't run to him. She didn't cry. She walked slowly, unsure if this was still the man who once lifted her up after matches, who kissed her forehead before every flight. She reached into her little backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A crayon drawing. 3 stick figures. One had long hair and a championship belt drawn across its waist. Above it was a name, Daddy. She placed it beside him on the hospital bed and whispered, "Come home." And then she left the room. That moment broke something in the nurses watching through the glass. Because up until then, Roman had barely reacted to anything. But now? He turned toward the drawing. Slowly. As if afraid to even breathe too hard and tear it. And for the first time in days, he cried. Not because of the company. Not because of Paul Heyman. Because of the one thing he thought he was protecting all along. Family. But outside those hospital walls, the symbols continued to speak. In the WWE Performance Center, a locker that once belonged to Roman Reigns remained untouched. Normally, when talent are inactive, their space is reassigned. But not this time. Trainers walked around it like it was sacred. Someone, no one knows who, left a set of black beads on the bench. Roman's old wrist piece. The one he wore before the bloodline even formed. Back when he was still Roman, not the tribal chief. Before the wait. Before the fall. And taped to the inside of the locker door was a quote. Handwritten. No name. You can lead an army and still die alone. Meanwhile, Solo Sikoa trained harder than ever. But not with joy. Those close to him noticed it. More intensity. More silence. But no pride. Because the symbols followed him too. A photo fell from his gym bag during sparring. A photo of him and Roman from a family reunion, years ago. Both smiling. Both unscarred by betrayal. Paul Heyman stood in the background of the shot, barely in frame. When another trainee tried to return the photo, Solo didn't even look up. He just said, "Keep it." The line wasn't rude. It was hollow. Because Solo may have been part of the rise. But now he was drowning in the fall. And still, Paul Heyman remained a ghost. No interviews. No comments. No press. But symbols of his presence still haunted the backstage corridors. A monitor at gorilla position was found playing an old promo from 2020, Roman Reigns and Heyman standing together for the first time. Wrestling's most dangerous mind, and its most dominant force. Someone unplugged the monitor. No one asked who. No one wanted to know. And across the country, at a fan convention in Houston, a small table was set up for Jey Uso. He hadn't appeared in weeks. No sign of him on Raw or SmackDown. No updates. But at that table, he sat quietly. Signing autographs. Smiling. Until a young fan handed him a replica Universal Championship. Signed by Roman Reigns. "Can you add yours next to his?" Jey stared at it for a long time. Then signed it anyway. But before handing it back, he said quietly, "Don't forget who wore it first." The fan didn't understand. But the parents did. They nodded. And just like that, another symbol etched itself into this unraveling saga. Because this wasn't just about what was broken. It was about what was remembered. Even the fans knew it. Outside arenas, vigil signs appeared. Candlelight tributes. Hand-painted posters. One read, "We believed in the bloodline. We still believe in Roman." Another, "WWE built a kingdom. But Roman gave it a soul." And in the heart of Florida, outside the hospital where Roman remained, someone left a black hoodie. The same design he wore when he returned in 2020. The start of the tribal chief era. Pinned to the hoodie? A handwritten note. Was any of it real? That phrase spread like wildfire online. It wasn't a catchphrase. It was a wound. Because fans didn't just mourn a character, they mourned a truth they thought they knew. They had followed Roman's rise. Cheered his redemption. Booed his dominance. But they never doubted his devotion. And now? They didn't know what to feel. That was the true tragedy. Not the fall. But the uncertainty. The fracture between what was real and what was scripted. Between legacy and lie. But the most haunting symbol of all? Came late one night. A janitor cleaning a closed production room found a box of old props, championship replicas, robes, and used footage reels. At the bottom of the box, there was a crown. Plastic. Cheap. A prototype from a scrapped Bloodline segment. Across the inside, someone had written a message in Sharpie. "Even kings bleed." No one claimed the writing. No one had to. Because in this empire, every symbol told a story. And every story was a eulogy. Not for a man, but for the version of him that trusted too deeply, stood too proudly, and fell too silently. Roman Reigns was still breathing. But everything he believed in? Wasn't. What happens when the hero becomes the question? When the foundation of everything you believed in, titles, family, loyalty, isn't just shaken, but put on trial? That's exactly what happened in the weeks following Roman Reigns' collapse. Because what started as a medical emergency had become something far more dangerous, a reckoning. The kind that doesn't wait for courtrooms. The kind that doesn't require judges or lawyers. This trial happened in the media. In locker rooms. In whispers. In silence. And above all, in the hearts of those who once stood beside him. At first, it was subtle. News outlets started pulling old quotes. Digging into archives. Looking at Roman Reigns not as a performer, but as a cultural figure. A polarizing leader. An icon. And now, possibly, a symbol of systemic failure. The New York Times ran an op-ed, "The Bloodline and the Myth of Modern Kingship." ESPN published an investigative feature, "When Power Turns Inward, the Roman Reigns Collapse." Even non-wrestling platforms chimed in. Podcasts that never covered WWE began dissecting the Bloodline saga as if it were political theater. Family dynasties. Corporate puppetry. Psychological warfare. One viral clip featured a sociologist analyzing Roman's final year. He carried himself like a monarch. Not because he wanted to rule, but because he felt he had to. The pressure of cultural representation. The burden of tribal legacy. And ultimately, the isolation of leadership. That's what broke him. Not the betrayal. The loneliness. But the real indictment came from within WWE's own archives. Clips. Hundreds of them. Resurfaced. Recontextualized. Roman staring down Jey Uso, demanding obedience. Roman telling Heyman, "You work for me." Roman, after winning at WrestleMania, whispering to the title, "No one takes this from me." Fans started asking uncomfortable questions. Was Roman always in control? Or was he simply convincing himself he was? And just like that, the narrative began to shift. Not out of hate. Out of confusion. People didn't want to tear Roman down. They wanted to understand how the strongest man in the room ended up alone on the floor. And so the analysis deepened. One particular clip from 2021 went viral again. An interview with Roman during the height of his tribal chief run. The interviewer asked, "What's the one thing that scares you the most?" Roman took a breath. Then answered, "Waking up and realizing it didn't matter. That everything I sacrificed was just a storyline." No one paid attention to that quote then. Now? It hit like prophecy. Because for the first time in years, the WWE Universe, the most loyal fanbase in sports entertainment, wasn't just watching a product. They were dissecting a tragedy. And that's when the trial turned global. Samoan media outlets picked up the story. Elders and community leaders began speaking in public. They didn't care about titles or ratings. They cared about what Roman represented. One headline from a Pacific Island publication read, "He carried our name." They let him fall. The fallout rippled even deeper. Charities Roman had partnered with began releasing carefully worded statements. "We support Joe Anoa'i in his recovery. His work has touched countless lives. Our thoughts remain with him." Notice the phrasing? Joe Anoa'i. Not Roman Reigns. Because even the organizations didn't know which name carried the truth anymore. Was the man who showed up to visit sick children the same one who ruled over the bloodline with an iron fist? Was he the egotist, or the martyr? And in that ambiguity, Roman's legacy stood on trial. Not by haters. By believers. By people who had cheered him. Worn his merch. called him the tribal chief. Now? They hesitated. Not because they turned on him. Because they weren't sure if he had been turned on. Or if he had turned away from himself. And WWE? They tried to defend him. Too late. Triple H gave a short, rehearsed statement: Roman Reigns is a once-in-a-generation talent. His contributions to this company are beyond measure. We look forward to welcoming him back when he's ready. But even that statement raised alarms. When he's ready. Ready for what? To wrestle again? To speak? To forgive? Because deep inside, everyone knew Roman Reigns may have recovered physically. But emotionally? He was still bleeding. And the whispers inside WWE grew louder. Would Roman return? Would he speak? Would he expose everything? Or worse, would he disappear and let the silence become the final chapter? Because silence is louder than truth. And as the company scrambled to move forward, creating new feuds, elevating new stars, nothing felt the same. The ring felt smaller. The chants? Hollow. Because in the absence of Roman, every show became a courtroom. And every fan? A juror. Deciding whether to believe in the myth again. Or walk away. Meanwhile, inside his hospital room, Roman Reigns stared at the ceiling. No visitors today. No questions. Just a tablet on the table, playing a clip from his own match, WrestleMania 38. The night he unified the titles. He watched himself stand tall. Arms out. Belts in both hands. The crowd screaming. And he whispered to no one, "Was I ever really the chief?" Then he reached for the drawing his daughter left him. Folded it. Placed it under his pillow. And closed his eyes. Because whether he liked it or not, his legacy was no longer his. It belonged to the world now. And the world? Was still deciding.